My name is Lennar Hart, and for most of my life, I was the girl nobody saw. In a house filled with voices, mine barely existed. My mother's words, "no one needs you," were the soundtrack of my childhood. They weren't shouted, they were delivered like simple facts, like the weather. I tried to believe they were wrong, but when every award I brought home was met with silence and every achievement felt like a ghost passing through the room, it was hard not to wonder if she was right. But here's the thing about being told you're unnecessary. You start to build a fire inside yourself, a quiet promise to prove that you are. While my mother thought she was breaking me, she was sharpening me. Every lonely night, every unanswered question, every door that closed without a second glance became fuel. This isn't a story about running away from pain. It's about transforming it. From the shadows of that small, cold house to rooms filled with people who now call my name, this is how I went from being the girl no one needed to the woman thousands can't live without. I grew up in a house that looked perfectly ordinary from the outside. A neat garden, polished windows, and curtains that swayed gently with the evening breeze. But inside, it felt like a world where my existence barely mattered. My name is Lena Hart, and in that home, my voice carried no weight. My mother had a way of dismissing me that required almost no effort. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence was sharp enough. Her words, when they did come, were measured and cold. "No one needs you, Lena." They landed like stones in a still pond, rippling through every corner of my mind. At school, I tried to prove her wrong. I chased medals, collected certificates, and forced smiles as teachers praised me for achievements that no one at home ever bothered to notice. Each report card I proudly presented would slide into a drawer or disappear under a pile of unopened mail. My father hid behind newspapers and evening news reports, pretending he couldn't hear the quiet cruelty in the room. My siblings carried on their lives, their laughter echoing like a private club I'd never been invited to join. The air in our house was heavy with conversations that never included me. Sometimes I would stand at the edge of the living room door, waiting for someone to look up, to notice, to ask why my eyes looked like they carried storms. No one did. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, the walls humming with muffled voices from my parents' bedroom, the hallway clock marking every second of my invisibility. It was during those silent hours that I began to understand something important. If I waited for someone to save me, I would disappear completely. I started to write in secret, filling notebooks with thoughts I couldn't say aloud. My small room became a hiding place and a training ground. I devoured stories of people who built their own worlds, people who turned rejection into power. I searched late at night for ways to create something that was mine, anything that might prove I had value beyond the four walls that denied me. Sometimes I would look out my window at the streetlights stretching into the distance and imagine a life where my name meant something, where the world would call for me even if my mother never did. The loneliness was crushing, but it was also a strange kind of fuel. Every unspoken word, every cold glance, every dinner where I was invisible carved a quiet promise into my heart. One day, I will become someone they can't ignore. I didn't know it then, but those long nights were forging the steel I would need for the battles ahead. What my mother thought was breaking me was, in truth, building me into someone far stronger than she could have ever imagined. The day everything snapped began like any other. Gray morning light spilling across the kitchen table where no one met my eyes. I was 17, old enough to understand the quiet hierarchy of our home, but still foolish enough to hope for change. My mother's voice cut through the stale air as I set down a plate of toast. "Lena," she said without even looking at me, "you should stop pretending anyone needs you here. You're only in the way." It wasn't the first time she'd said something cruel, but there was a sharpness that morning, a finality that pierced deeper than before. Something inside me shifted, like a door slamming shut. I remember gripping the edge of the counter, the cool surface grounding me as a storm rolls in my chest. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. My siblings exchanged a quick glance and went back to their breakfast, the scrape of utensils on plates sounding louder than any scream. In that instant, I realized there would never be a moment when they suddenly understood my worth. If I stayed, I would wither quietly until I disappeared altogether. After school, instead of heading home, I walked for hours through streets I barely knew, letting the city noise drown out the echo of my mother's words. I ended up at a small cafe, the kind with warm lights and soft music, where strangers smiled without expectation. I sat by the window watching people rush to lives where they belonged, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I was leaving. Not in a dramatic runaway sense, but in a deliberate, calculated way. I would save every bit of money from my part-time job, apply for college in another city, and carve a path that didn't require my family's permission. That night, back in my room, I packed a small box with the things that felt like pieces of my true self. A journal, a few favorite books, the old laptop I'd been using to research scholarships. As I zipped it shut, I caught my reflection in the dark window. For the first time, I didn't see the invisible daughter. I saw someone standing on the edge of her own life, ready to claim it. The next few weeks were a blur of secret applications and late-night emails to universities, each sent message a quiet act of rebellion. My mother remained indifferent, unaware that her cruelty had finally lit the fuse. What she thought was another day of breaking me was in truth the day I began to rebuild. When I finally received the acceptance letter months later, I didn't rush to share the news. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my journal, a private victory I wasn't ready to expose. That morning in the kitchen had been my breaking point, but it was also my birth. The girl they dismissed was gone, and in her place stood a young woman determined to create a life where she would never again. Leaving home didn't feel like freedom at first. It felt like stepping into an empty room where every sound echoed back at me. The city I moved to was louder, brighter, and endlessly alive, yet I often felt small within it, a single heartbeat against the roar of trains and traffic. I rented a cramped attic apartment with peeling wallpaper and a single window that overlooked a maze of rooftops. At night, when the world outside quieted, I would sit at a tiny desk and plan. College classes filled my days, but my real education began after midnight. I devoured free online courses, watched endless tutorials, and scribbled business ideas into the same worn journal that had carried me through my teenage years. I started with nothing. No investors, no connections, no family safety net. What I had was determination and the memory of my mother's words burning in my chest. Every rejection email from internships, every side job that barely paid the rent became another reason to push harder. To earn extra money, I worked shifts at a bookstore where I learned the rhythm of people, how they moved, what they cared about, how a single story could change their day. It was there, among the shelves, that the spark finally caught. I noticed how customers lingered in the small community corner, leaving notes and recommendations for strangers. Connection. That was the word that pulsed in my mind like a neon sign. People needed a place to belong, to share, to feel seen. The very thing I had been denied my whole life was the thing I now wanted to create. Slowly, quietly, I began building a digital platform, a virtual space where anyone could share their story and find encouragement. I coded the website myself, teaching my fingers to dance across the keyboard until the sun rose. I saved tips from my bookstore job to buy a secondhand camera for live streams and recorded late-night videos, my voice trembling but determined, encouraging others who felt invisible. At first, only a handful of users signed up, but I treated each one like they were the most important person in the world. I responded to every message, celebrated every small milestone, and watched as my tiny circle of strangers began to grow. Dozens became hundreds. Messages of gratitude began to flood my inbox. People saying that for the first time, they felt heard. I never told my family. They still believed I was just another college student with average grades and no direction, and I wanted to keep it that way. Their ignorance was my shield, allowing me to build without interference. Nights blurred into mornings as I worked in silence, the glow of my computer the only witness to the life I was creating. Each new subscriber felt like a quiet vindication, a whisper that contradicted every cruel word my mother had ever spoken. She said no. Success rarely announces itself with trumpets. It sneaks in, subtle at first, until one day it's undeniable. My turning point came on a crisp autumn afternoon when an email from a well-known online magazine landed in my inbox. They wanted to feature my platform in a story about digital communities that were changing lives. I read the message 3 times, hardly believing the words. Within a week, a reporter arrived in my tiny apartment with a camera crew, their lights turning my once quiet workspace into a miniature studio. I spoke about loneliness, resilience, and the power of connection, my voice steady even as my heart pounded. The article went live the following morning, and within hours, my phone buzzed with notifications that never seemed to stop. Thousands of new users signed up overnight. Donations and partnership offers flooded in. My inbox overflowed with messages from people who said the platform had given them hope in their darkest moments. I barely slept, riding the adrenaline of a dream turning real. But the true shock came 2 days later when my mother called for the first time in months. Her voice, usually cold and sharp, trembled with a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. "Lena, I saw something online," she said. "Is this you?" She mentioned the article, her tone carefully balanced between disbelief and a pride she refused to name. My father sent a short text, just 2 words, "Impressive work." My siblings began liking my social posts and sharing my videos, their sudden attention a dizzying reversal of the years of silence. Neighbors from my hometown left comments, some apologizing for never noticing me before, others claiming they always knew I was destined for something bigger. Each notification felt like a small echo of justice, proof that the world was finally calling the name my family once ignored. And yet, even as recognition spread, I kept my composure. I responded politely to my mother's questions, but offered no details beyond what was public. I wanted her to see the results, not the process. I wanted her to understand that the girl she once called unnecessary had built something entirely on her own. My platform continued to grow, now supporting events, workshops, and virtual meetups that drew thousands of participants each month. Every time a new success story emerged, a user finding friendship, a lonely teen discovering purpose, I felt the quiet triumph of rewriting my family's narrative. They had spent years convincing me no one needed me, and now the evidence of my worth was impossible to ignore. When my mother finally said, "Maybe I was wrong about you," her voice cracking through the phone line, I felt no need to gloat. I simply smiled at the screen, my heart steady, and replied, "People always need someone, Mom. You just didn't see it then." The girl they dismissed was no longer a shadow. She was a headline, a movement, and the architect of a world where no one would ever feel as invisible as I once did. The night of my first live event felt unreal, as if every step toward the stage carried me farther from the girl who once sat unnoticed at a silent dinner table. Months of planning had led to this, a packed auditorium glowing with camera lights, rows of faces from across the country, and a streaming audience of thousands more watching online. Backstage, I gripped the microphone and listened to the crowd's gentle roar, a sound that vibrated like a heartbeat through the floor. When the announcer called my name, Lena Hart, the room erupted in applause so loud it blurred into a single thunderous wave. I stepped into the spotlight, and for a moment, I simply stood there, breathing it in. The stage lights were blinding, but I could make out silhouettes of people wiping their eyes, strangers who had traveled miles just to be part of something I created. As I began to speak, sharing the journey from isolation to connection, I felt the weight of every lonely night, every whispered insult, every door that once closed in my face, and then I felt it lift. My voice no longer trembled. It carried across the hall, strong and sure, weaving through stories of resilience and hope. Behind the camera crews and streaming screens, I caught a glimpse of my family in the front row. My siblings leaned forward, wide-eyed. My father clasped his hands, a quiet pride softening his usual reserve. And my mother, the woman whose words had once burned through my chest, sat motionless, tears catching the stage light. I locked eyes with her for a single heartbeat. There was no anger left, only a quiet recognition of everything that had brought us to this moment. When I invited the audience to stand and share a collective promise, to see the unseen, to remind someone that they matter, the hall rose in unison. Thousands of voices joined together, echoing a truth my mother once denied. People do need me, and they always had. After the event, she approached me slowly, almost timidly. "Lena," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I was wrong. People need you." I smiled, not with triumph, but with the calm certainty I had earned. "They always did, Mom. You just couldn't see it." Cameras flashed as we stood there, not as enemies, but as two women finally facing the truth. That night, as I stepped outside into the cool air, the city lights stretched endlessly ahead, a glittering path of possibilities. I thought of the countless messages in my inbox, the communities thriving on the platform, and the thousands of lives quietly changed because I refused to stay invisible. My mother's words had once been a curse, but now they felt like a distant echo, one that had driven me to create a world where no one would ever have to wonder if they mattered. The girl no one needed had become the woman thousands depended on, and her name now carried a weight that no silence could ever erase. The days following that unforgettable night unfolded like a dream, but it was a dream sharpened with purpose. Awards, interviews, and invitations poured in, each one a reminder that my work had outgrown the small circle of hurt where it began. Yet amid the glitter and flashing cameras, I felt a deeper pull, one that urged me to transform recognition into lasting change. I launched initiatives to fund mental health programs in schools, created mentorship networks for young women, and built partnerships with shelters that offered safety to those who once felt unseen, just as I had. Every email of gratitude, every tearful handshake carried the weight of lives quietly shifting toward hope. The platform I had built was no longer about proving my mother wrong. It was about proving everyone right who dared to believe in the power of a single voice. Still, late at night when the applause had faded, I sometimes thought of the girl I used to be, sitting at the edge of family dinners, straining to be heard. I realized my greatest triumph wasn't the stage or the headlines. It was the quiet forgiveness blooming inside me. One crisp evening, I invited my parents to visit the community center funded by our programs. As we walked through the bright halls filled with laughter and art, my mother reached for my hand. For the first time in years, she held it firmly, not as a mother guiding a child, but as a woman holding on to another woman's strength. "You've built something beautiful, Lena," she whispered, eyes glistening, something I could never have imagined. Her words were soft, but in them I heard the unspoken apology, the recognition I had once begged for. I squeezed her hand and smiled. "It's not just me, Mom. It's all of us, and it's only the beginning." That night, standing on the balcony of my office as the city stretched out beneath a sky full of stars, I felt the future hum with possibility. The bitterness that had once fueled me was gone, replaced by a steady fire of purpose. I had turned pain into a movement, loneliness into connection, and doubt into undeniable proof that one person's resolve could change thousands of lives. The world no longer knew me as the girl nobody needed. I was Lena Hart, the founder, the voice, the catalyst. And as the wind carried the distant sound of music from a festival across town, I understood that my story was not an ending, but a doorway. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new hearts to lift, and new voices to amplify. My mother's words had once cut like knives, but now they were nothing more than stepping stones across the vast river of possibility. The girl they once ignored had built a bridge for countless others, and standing there beneath the endless night sky, I felt the quiet certainty that this beginning, was only the start of everything still to come.